Today we're going to be talking about the latest range of PoE switches from Alloy. So it's the ATS range, and we're going to go through them in a little bit of detail. They are unmanaged, so today shouldn't take very long at all. In terms of normal housekeeping, same protocol as always for those who are familiar. For those who haven't joined me before, all the audience will be muted throughout the presentation. Feel free to ask text-based questions through the presentation, or at the end when I open the floor for questions, I'll take audio questions or again text-based questions. So at the end of the presentation, I'll come back, go through any text-based questions, take audio questions from the floor, and hopefully by the end of it we've all learnt something and we all get some value out of it. So starting with the agenda, let's get moving. So sales and technical overview, we'll have a quick look at some comparisons in terms of speeds, feeds and prices for what's out in the market in this area, and then we'll go into the questions and answers. So PoE ATS Layer 2 switches. So the ATS range series consists of 4 switch models, 2 each of fast Ethernet and 2 each of gigabit. These are all unmanaged PoE switches. So what does that mean for us? It means we can take them out onto a customer site, we plug them into power, we plug our PoE devices in, and they work. They do everything that we need. All 4 of these boxes are in full metal housing, so very robust units, and let's get into some more details about them, hey? So as I said, 4 new switches, 2 of them are gigabit. There's an 8-port and a 24-port gigabit PoE switch. 2 of them are fast Ethernet, so an 8-port and a 24-port fast Ethernet switch. All of these switches are 802.3 AT. This means we have 30 watts of power, up to 30 watts of power per port for our PoE devices, and of course this is backwards compatible with the old 802.3 AF, which only produced about 15 watts per port as a maximum. So again, all of them are layer 2, totally unmanaged, so we take them out on site, plug them in, and they do what we need. Not much more to say on that slide. In terms of the part numbers for ordering these guys, you'll see it's PoE FE8T, and so that says it's PoE, it's fast Ethernet, it's got 8 ports of RJ45, and it's version 2 of this switch. For those of you familiar with the Alloy product range, we used to have a PoE FE8T, so this is version 2. Version 2, we've done a couple of things. We've whipped out the fan. There's no longer a fan in this device, which makes it silent, makes it very, very useful in small office, classrooms, home office environments where we're not going to get any noise. So and as I said, that guy is 8 ports of 10100. It's also a desktop switch, so a small form factor, but when we ship these guys, we ship them with some 19-inch rack-mountable ears. So these small form factor desktop switches can in fact be mounted in a 19-inch standard rack. The PoE FE24T V2, or version 2, is our 24-port version and replaces the previous PoE FE24TV. Really, the major change in these guys is we've upgraded the power supply technology for higher MTBS and some better temperature ranges. And as I said, in the 8-port we removed the fan. Due to the demand that we had for the previous versions of these switches, the unmanaged 10100 PoE switches, we've now introduced the PoE gigabit Ethernet 8-port and 24-port switch. So again, the 8-port is full metal construction for the gigabit switch, full metal construction, fanless, and desktop or rack mountable. The 24-port version has a fan and is rack mountable, of course. So as I say, 4 new switches, all supporting 802.3 AT, or 30 watts of power per port. So in terms of just how much power we do have on these boxes, you can see here we've got on the fast Ethernet 8 port, we have 130 watts available. On the fast Ethernet 24 port, we have 220. On the gigabit 8 port, again 130, and on the gigabit 24 port, 250 watts. What does that mean for us? That means we can power an awful lot of telephones and higher power sucking devices. So let's have a look at some of the things that we will be using these guys for as well. In terms of switching capacity, these guys are all wire speed, okay? So we see as we go across the switch part numbers, the switching capacity increases to take advantage of or address the higher port density. These guys are all wire speed switches, whether you're looking at the 8 port, the 24 port, the gigabit or the fast Ethernet, all wire speed. MAC table address sizes increase as we go up the food chain. PoE is available on all ports. That's not to say that we can have full power on all ports, but every single port in that switch can deliver PoE power. This is something distinctly different to a lot of our competitors out there. So default form factors, desktop for the 8-port switches and rack mount for the 24-port switches, although as I said, the 8-port switches do come with 19-inch rack mount ears if you need to rack mount those 8-port switches. Operating temperature 0 to 40 degrees Celsius. In terms of uses, the main driver for high power PoE or 802.3 AT PoE out in the marketplace has been pan, tilt, zoom video cameras, because of having a motor and moving parts in these video cameras, as having a motor and moving parts has a higher power draw. We've seen some remote management devices, so equipment that can monitor and transmit back over Wi-Fi or radio or any number of remote wireless communication form factors will quite often require higher than the standard 12.5 watts that you get at the end of an AF PoE system. So a couple of networking vendors out there haven't managed to be able to engineer their MIMO Wi-Fi below the AF standard. So as a result of that, for those vendors, you need to have a AT capable switch or a 30 watt capable switch such as these to power their wireless access points. And another thing that we're seeing is PoE powered appliances and management devices going out into networks, particularly in manufacturing areas with solid state and or movable parts which require more power than a traditional AF PoE switch could deliver. So all of these environments are a must-have environment for 802.3 AT. One of the other uses we see is for high density telephony. So where we want to fully populate a switch with telephones or PoE devices, the AT standard with the larger power supplies tends to be a useful environment to do that. Another environment where these unmanaged switches, we're selling a lot of these into, and we saw this in the previous version of these switches, and we expect to see a lot more of it going forward, is unmanaged PoE switches for support of telephony. And this is quite a religious argument. We get some people who say you must have management for telephony, and others say you don't. But in the deployment that you see up here on the screen, where we have a switch router or layer 3 switch in the middle of the network between our totally separate voice network infrastructure and our data infrastructure to route between them, our telephones are never going to generate enough data on that network to oversubscribe or require any sort of quality of service management. Any quality of service management where it is required between the data and the PBX or the data network and voice data can be managed at the central layer 3 device. So As I say, we get many and varied opinions on that and how best to do it, but we've seen lots of examples of this sort of deployment. If you've got the cabling infrastructure where you can support a couple of data cables, a couple of if data infrastructure supports a couple of ports out to every desk, then separate telephony and data networks makes perfect sense, especially where you can do the voice network over very low cost PoE switches. The other main reason for deploying PoE switches like this in voice networks is to ensure that you have centralized power management, so we can put UPSs on our PBXs and our PoE switches, so when the lights go out, the telephone system continues to work. So I say we see a lot of voice networks deployed in this manner. In terms of some comparisons, and this comparison chart was done about a month ago, so it could well have changed. It changes every day. I went and updated it a week ago and found a couple of additional products out there. So the main things I want you to take away from this chart is if we look across on the right hand side, in terms of switches out there, unmanaged switches supporting AT, there's not very many of them about at all. In terms of 24-port switches supporting full 802.3 AT 30 watts power, couldn't find any on the market outside of ours. If you look down the fourth column and the fifth column, the fifth and sixth column, so ports and ports of PoE, you'll see that a lot of these vendors who are doing 8-port switches will only support PoE on 4 of them. You can see that the watts available on the majority of our competitors' switches are much lower than the watts, so therefore the total devices that can be supported is much lower on all of our competitors' switches. And I think you're looking at those price comparisons now. The pricing that I've got there on the screen for the Alloy switches is SRP, so suggested retail pricing. The price range that I have for the competitors' switches is the best to worst that I could find those products for on the internet. So that does change, and you might be able to go find something better or nothing as good on any given day, but as you can see, our price point is significantly better than all of the competitors. So I think from a comparison point of view, we have better price, more ports, and more power. So I think we're probably in quite a nice spot in terms of this range. So in summary, 4 new switches, 2 of them are gigabit, and one's 8-port and one's 24-port. The other 2 are fast Ethernet switches, one's 8-port and one's 24-port. All of them are 802.3 AT, or up to 30 watts per port, backwards compatible with our 802.3 AF products and standards. Again, all are just layer 2, and as we've stated over and over, they're all unmanaged, so ease of deployment is sensational, and industry best price point. So the marketing guys have put some work in for us for the launch of these products, and for those of you who are with us today, I'm pleased to see we've got quite a good turnout. For those of you with us today, we have this offer on the new gigabit switches, so the PoE Gigabit Ethernet 8T and the PoE Gigabit Ethernet 24T at 87 and 199 respectively ex-GST. You will want to send an email to sales@alloy.com.au to get all the T's and C's, because at these sort of prices, as you can imagine, there are some T's and C's. For those of you who have joined us and aren't actually Alloy resellers at this time, all you need to do is go to that reseller registration page on that slide there, become a reseller, and you'll be able to get access to that pricing as well. So with that, guys, I'm going to open up the floor to any questions, and we'll walk through these point at a time. If you use the interface to raise your hand, I'll then be able to see that you want to ask a question, and I'll unmute you and take that question. For those of you who are feeling a bit bashful, feel free to use the text-based interface to ask any questions that you've got. But as I say, pretty straightforward range of switches. I'm not expecting too many questions today. Okay, so I'm starting to get some questions in here with from the text interface, so just hold on and I'll start to address those for you.